Hi, I'm Kashyap Kompella and I'm an AI industry analyst. So, this session is a run up to the AI World Summit 2021, and it is a part of a series of dialogues where thought leaders and experts discuss the most important issues and share their best practices. So, with me to discuss sustainability development goals, artificial intelligence, and more is Kübra Koldemir, who is a sustainability researcher at the Arguden Governance Academy. The Arguden Governance Academy is a foundation dedicated to improve the quality of governance in public, nonprofit, private, and international organizations. So, welcome, Kübra, and please tell us more about your background and your current focus areas.
Hi, Kashyap. Thank you so much for having me here. As you have mentioned, I work at the moment at Arguden Governance Academy. It's an Istanbul-based nonprofit organization. And in the past, I used to work in investments as well. I used to work in New York City in a hedge fund as an emerging markets bank analyst. And currently we do a lot of sustainability research, and we write sustainability articles as well. And hopefully I will try to bring in some of the recommendations that we make in our articles in our interview.
Great. Kübra, I have read some of your recent articles, and they have focused on social issues and how many SDGs are very interconnected with each other. And they're more really about equality in our societies in particular. So can you talk more about that?
Yes. First of all, it's very true that one of our focus in our recent articles has been to discuss the SDGs. Indeed, many sustainability issues, Kashyap, are very connected, and we have been recommending in our articles not to look at various sustainability issues in isolation, but truly understand the connections between them as well. For example, whether it's climate change, fighting for climate change, which is SDG 13, or protecting the nature and the biodiversity, it's SDG 15. Or striving to live in an equal society. Those are SDG 8 and SDG 10. All sustainability goals can be very closely related to each other. So let's start with climate change, SDG 13. Climate change is an urgent and global issue. Everybody knows it transcends any borders. At the same time, climate change can also worsen inequalities big time. Just one example, some of the poorest countries in the world lie in the tropics. Some of the most vulnerable people, therefore, live there in poverty. And if temperatures were to increase due to global warming to a much larger scale, then those areas would become simply inhabitable. And climate change could then force millions of people to abandon their homes and mass immigration, as you will know. I mean, immigration is an issue today. And on this type of scale, it could even have a negative impact on stability and peace across the world. So some of those vulnerable people would be most affected by climate change or by worsening biodiversity loss. Also, then, same thing with biodiversity. Here, very similar connection there as well. The areas in the world with highest biodiversity are the ones, again, in the tropics. And in these regions, many people actually rely directly on forests, fishing, and ecotourism. This is different in many Western countries where more people work in services. Therefore, biodiversity risks are related on interruptions of their supply chains due to sourcing raw materials, for example. Therefore, the difference is that in the tropics, there is a direct impact on the livelihoods, where it's much more indirect in Western countries. Then one last example that I want to give, SDG 5 on gender inequality. We cannot possibly imagine a fair society if we don't get better at tackling gender inequalities. If that's okay, I wish to highlight one report published last year from Oxfam. The report found that women and girls put in 12 billion hours of unpaid work on a daily basis, which is really translates into $10 trillion a year contribution to the world economy. And that's, just to put things in perspective, that's about 3 times the size of the global tech industry, which we all hype all the time. So it would be, I guess, fair to say that girls and women are helping drive our economies. However, oftentimes those girls and women also do not necessarily have access to education. They don't have always access to decent jobs. And most importantly, they don't have a say in how our societies should be running.
Great. I mean, Kübra, I think you have given me a lot to think about, and all the listeners also. There is so much to chew in what you have said. And as you're talking through climate change issues, through the issues of gender equality, livelihoods, etc., I've been thinking about how AI can really help. And I can think of a few ways in which AI can help. First of all, when the goals and the SDGs are so interconnected, so measurement and monitoring, such an integrated and complex set of goals, it requires processing vast amounts of data from different sources. And also we need to identify patterns that humans alone working in silos cannot. They cannot detect such patterns as to whether we're making progress, what are the real problems. And we need to really come up with an integrated reporting tool and dashboards for decision makers. And machine learning and other data crunching technologies are well suited for that. So that will help us give a clear picture of where we are at and where we're going. Mm-hmm. And coming to the solutions themselves, AI and data can be leveraged in different SDGs that you've highlighted. Say in agriculture, to help improve yields and raise incomes so that some of the inequities that you've discussed sort of are mitigated. In climate change, really to crunch vast amounts of data to improve urban infrastructure. I mean, you talked about migrations between countries, but rural to urban migration is a big issue. So the quality of urban infrastructure is coming down. So how do we improve that urban infrastructure? And in general, if we were to improve our overall quality of governance, we need to make better use of data and analytics. So those are some of my thoughts. So as I reflect on what you said, you've highlighted a lot of the challenges and really painted the picture on why business as usual is not an option. There is a clear imperative for change. So let's talk about finding solutions. So what are some of the solutions that you have in mind that you can propose so that we make progress?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, in tackling inequality in general, of course, we need to bring in much more human rights concepts and agenda into our policies and frameworks, and also to all our institutions, that's for sure. However, due to the limited time of the interview, I'll suggest that we highlight one cause, which may sometimes depending on where you are, which may have an impact on social progress, if that's okay. So there are, I believe, moments in history that show that peaceful protests sometimes can bring change, because peaceful protests sometimes can shine a light on injustices. However, oftentimes also protesters are portrayed as looters by those who want to discredit their cause and maintain their status quo. So it's sometimes a complex issue too. As an example, even though there are many historical examples just from recent history, from last year, there have been, we all know, there have been mass protests related to Black Lives Matter movement, which was against police brutality, and especially towards Black people. And this quickly spread across the world. Just to give some numbers again, only in the United States is estimated to be 15 million to 25 million protesters. So maybe peaceful protests could be one cause that we could bring up.
See, Kübra, I mean, I hear you, but I want to push this a little bit.
Okay.
I think that protests are useful to the extent that they draw attention to a cause or a movement. But do you think that protests alone are enough to create change, or do they create enough change? So, I mean, where are we? I mean, where are we going with protests?
Okay, all right, that's a fair question, I will say. I certainly, there are, first of all, the answer to your question is yes and no. So there have been some leaders who had been always raising their voice in support of this movement for many years. But I think most people right now agree that it is last year's events, because they happen in such scale, that many global corporations have come out for the first time in public to support the Black Lives Matter movement, okay, as a positive cause. And also, they may have some corporations, not all of them, but some corporations, I believe, have genuinely understood in this process that this is a very urgent matter, not just a nice thing to do, but really urgent matter. And they have accordingly started to revise their Black Lives Matter action plans. And they have further made improvements on their diversity and inclusion policies, which were already there. So at the same time, the answer is also no, because sometimes inequalities can be very subtle. Many Black colleagues, I believe, would sometimes try to explain to us that our workplaces can be in self-denial about some of the social issues, which may be even unintentional, not always intentional. And because sometimes the issues can be very subtle, as I said before. In fact, same thing can be also the case with women. Some women that you would expect least may be, in fact, dealing with major inequality issues because some of the social norms, we have accepted them as a society. And therefore, both when Black people in their workplaces or women, when they try to voice sometimes their concerns, they may even look ungrateful, or while in reality they may be giving a fight against a real inequality issue that they are having and they are facing. So I guess all I'm trying to say is that sometimes inequality can also be very difficult to articulate, and it can be confusing. And therefore, yes, overall, this type of large-scale protests from last year for Black people's concerns have made some difference. But I believe because of the subtlety of some of those issues, I believe there's also a very long way to go.
Very interesting. I mean, again, I mean, very perceptive as well. I mean, much to unpack in there. But I just want to put on my technologist hat for a moment.
Sure.
And what I have seen in tracking the Black Lives Movement and protests elsewhere is that they have drawn attention to AI technologies, particularly facial recognition and surveillance tools. And because the errors of facial recognition systems can be quite high when it comes to certain demographics, such as African Americans or people with darker skin colors. So there is potential for abuse, potential for misuse. Some innocent people can be caught in the crosshairs of the criminal justice system. Definitely, that is that. And then in the case of surveillance, I say that big data can also mean Big Brother is watching over you. So I don't have any solutions, but it's a reminder that we need to think through the implications of the wider adoption of AI and other technologies. Mm-hmm. So as I think through, the issues that you highlight need both individual and institutional responses. They need technology solutions as well as policy changes and mandates. And to me, it looks like everyone has a role to play and contribute. So do you agree? Can you talk about, if you agree, how we all can contribute?
Yes, well, first of all, very much thank you for those insights on AI. But yes, that's one thing for sure, that every person may have power on their own to contribute to this process of introducing more human rights into our institutions. So, I mean, again, maybe if we would stick on the same example, simply for us to make it easier to understand certain concepts. Let's go back to the issue of the peaceful protests. During that time, for example, there were other people, other professionals who have also tried to contribute positively to what's happening. And for example, across the United States, not in any single states or specific states, but really if you look across the United States, many lawyers' associations have really tried to help the peaceful protesters by providing them legal support for example, increasing their pro bono hours to provide that consultation. And at the same time, we have heard a lot of people in the investment community who have also, on their own part, tried to be sensitive on those issues. As you will know, investors or financial professionals, sometimes depending on their profession, may have power to decide whom they will provide certain funds or whom they will deny funds, or when investing, what type of assets they will allocate in their portfolios. And there's a divestment strategy, so-called, which applies to sometimes unethical, what they consider to be unethical assets, if, for instance, fossil fuels, gun, tobacco, those may be divested from portfolios or excluded from portfolios. And same thing, for example, during those time of the protests, many financial professionals who had the power have denied funds to any of those institutions that that they believed have
money talks.
That dealt with those peaceful protesters in an unethical way. So yes, I mean, in short, of course, everybody can contribute and can do their part.
See, as I reflect on the messages that you're giving out, they need to be heard beyond much. They need to go far and wide and be heard beyond the technology community. But since this interview will largely have a technology audience, I want to ask you, do you have a message to the technology community?
Yes, I mean, I have a very brief message. I believe technology is a tool that should be for positive change. And this is positive change only when technology is made more inclusive. Therefore, I believe that AI needs to be implemented very carefully, so that, if we don't implement AI carefully, then there may be a risk of the undoing of the progress which we are already making towards the SDGs. So that would be my comment.
I agree with you. We've seen that AI can pose some serious worries and ethical concerns. It can help undo some of the work. It can entrench or increase inequality, algorithmic biases there. There are privacy violations and surveillance concerns about those things. So we need to be thoughtful in how and where we use AI. Obviously, there is a lot of potential to develop solutions using AI. So if we do that, it can be a useful tool to address the global challenges as clearly outlined in the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So with that, I think we should wrap this up, and thank you for your excellent insights and discussion today, Kübra.
Thank you very much, Kashyap. It was a pleasure talking to you.